Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.
Ay, qué hambre. ¿Pasamos por McDonald's?
Va, ¿qué ordenas normalmente?
Una quarter pounder.
Ah, eres una burger person.
Y unos McNuggets.
Ah, eres de las mías.
La mejor manera de conocer a alguien deal de McDonald's. Ordena por anticipado por el app de McDonald's y llévate 2 de tus favoritos, como un McNuggets de 10 piezas y una quarter pounder por solo $6. Precios y participación pueden variar, producto individual a precio regular.
The Gone Cold podcast may contain violent or graphic subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
On Tuesday, June 26, 1979, at an apartment complex in the Dallas, Texas suburb of Mesquite, 6-year-old Tyra Christine Heath popped her head into her family's home at about 7 p.m. Little Tyra had been out in the complex's courtyard playing with other children and took a break in an attempt to charm her mother Janice out of a couple brownies. But dinner was almost ready, the mother told her daughter, and there was no way she was getting a brownie before supper, let alone 2. Tyra wasn't the type of child to throw a fit, and instead she happily returned to her little friends outside to play until it was time to eat. Janice and Tyra were new to Mesquite. They'd only moved into the centrally located apartment complex with relatives 2 weeks before. This evening, in fact, was the first time Tyra had been allowed to play outside by herself since the move. Gary, Tyra's father, was in the process of transitioning from his job at a General Electric factory in Tyler to a Dallas catering company, and was days away from joining his wife and daughter in Mesquite. After Janice finished with dinner, taking her eyes off Tyra for about 15 minutes, she went outside looking for her daughter. It was about 7:30 p.m. Neighbors helped look, casually glancing over the several kids running back and forth for signs of 6-year-old Tyra. Panic began to set in as Janice could find no trace of her daughter after several minutes, which turned into hours of scouring the complex grounds and visiting other residents to ask if they'd seen Tyra. But no one had. At least, no one admitted to having seen the child. At 9:30 p.m., Tyra Heath's frantic mother called the Mesquite police, who showed up quickly. All night, law enforcement, aided by neighbors and other volunteers, searched for the little girl, but couldn't find so much as a clue of her whereabouts. It had to be an abduction, the cops thought, after searching a small perimeter around the apartment complex. The little girl's father, Gary, sped to Mesquite as soon as he got word his daughter was nowhere to be found. The following day, authorities, neighbors, relatives of Tyra, and a local Boy Scout troop continued the search, but still found no trace of the missing girl. Mesquite Police Sergeant Bill Drew was among the boots-on-the-ground officers looking for Tyra.
Basically, the only thing we have is just that she's missing. There aren't any witnesses. Nobody saw anything. We kind of feel like we've missed something. And that's why we're going back over and over it again. We're just keep trying to get the one big break that we hope will break the case.
Both Gary and Janice Heath were having difficulty holding themselves together during their daughter's disappearance, and the agonizing uncertainty only grew each hour Tyra remained missing.
You never realize, that something like this is going to happen. And when it does, I've seen people on the news and read about them that this has happened to them, and you just don't know until it happens to you. You just don't realize the kind of agony that these people go through. all I can say is the people that have children like Tyra, it's just please watch over them.
I don't know what to think, where she is or what. Because, like I say, we don't have any leads as to what's happened to her, and the police have worked hard. I mean, they've just gone on and on and on with it.
And if somebody has her, just, please take care of her. Like I said, if they've got any demands, please call us. We'll try to meet any and all.
He'd have to beg, borrow, and steal to come up with any kind of ransom, Gary said, but he would do it without thinking. Incredibly, the community was able to quickly raise $15,000, the 2021 equivalent of over $55,000. The Heath family were not a family of means. They were working class, so the quickly raised reward was a godsend.
Money will do a lot of things. And of course, she's worth more than any amount of money. There's just not enough money that, to replace her. We just want her back. No, you can't have no matter what. He said no. We just want her back.
This reward was offered to anyone who could provide information leading to Tyra's safe return. The information that finally came, however, did not lead to the 6-year-old being found alive. Rather, it led to her shallow grave. 9 days after little Tyra Heath vanished, a tip came in from a well-known police informant. In a wooded area about 3 miles from home to the southeast, the tipster told the cops, they'd find the body of the missing girl buried in a shallow grave. The Mesquite police made it to the area quickly and discovered her body, partially unburied and scattered by wildlife. Tyra's remains were described as skeleton-like. She'd been dead for several days, likely since the night she disappeared. The Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office said that since Tyra had no dental records and had never been fingerprinted, it's likely she'd never be identified officially. DNA testing in relation to police investigations was unheard of at the time, of course. Tyra Heath's mother, Janice, identified the body as her daughter's by the body's appearance and by clothing and other personal items. Because of the advanced state of decomposition, likely exacerbated by the hot Texas summer days, the cause of death was impossible to be determined for a fact. But Dallas County Assistant District Attorney Bill Westmoreland assured reporters that the lack of the cause of death would not impede his office's attempts at prosecuting the monster who killed Tyra.
The grand jury could find a manner and means unknown, and then it would be incumbent on the state to prove that the grand jury could not find out the cause of death. This makes it more difficult, but it doesn't rule it out completely as a matter of law.
With the tip that led to the body of 6-year-old Tyra Heath also came a name, James Richard Harris. Harris was a 25-year-old Mesquite sanitation worker who lived downstairs and several doors down from the Heath family with his wife and 7-year-old son. The day the cops came looking for him, Harris and his family had moved into a new home. He was arrested and charged with the murder of Tyra Heath on the night of Friday, July 6, 1979. In a signed confession, Harris said that when the 6-year-old girl came to his apartment looking for toys and the two were alone, he attempted to force her into fondling him. When she got scared and tried to run, Harris, being the coward that he is, grabbed her and squeezed her, and she stopped breathing. James Richard Harris was later tried for Tyra's murder, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. Before that, however, and just after his arrest, detectives with the Dallas Police Department couldn't get to Mesquite fast enough to question Harris for 2 unsolved cases in their jurisdiction: the February 1977 slaying of 7-year-old Ladina McCoy and the September 1977 murder of 12-year-old Susie Mages. What Dallas police did not know is that just a few months after the arrest of James Richard Harris for the murder of 6-year-old Tyra Heath, another child homicide would occur that shared striking similarities with the Ladina McCoy and Susie Mages cases, the murder of 7-year-old Elizabeth Barkley.
Are you in excruciating pain brought on by your son, daughter, or spouse suffering from addiction? You are not alone. If you call Recovery Centers of America today at 1-888-RECOVERY, your whole family can begin to recover. At Recovery Centers of America at Capital Region and Bracebridge Hall, your loved one will be treated with care by expert addiction professionals, while family programming will give you support and healing so that you can recover as well. RCA accepts insurance, provides transportation, and offers intervention services. Call 1-888-RECOVERY now.
Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals. John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
Clowns can get away with murder.
And Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Snapped. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.
Elizabeth Lynn Barkley was born in Dallas, Texas on December 21st, 1971 to newlyweds David and Linda. Elizabeth was an independent little girl who, according to her first-grade teacher, had a ton of sense and was a natural leader in her classroom. These traits, and that she was gutsy, her mother said, were likely only amplified after the birth of her little brother Scotty in 1975. Elizabeth was more than happy to take on the role of big sister. Her parents' divorce in 1977 was tough on her, but Elizabeth was the kind of resilient personality who could weather through tough times, while even setting an example for grown folks on how to do the same. After David and Linda's divorce, he was working in San Francisco, California as an Army research technician, and she was working in Dallas at Darrell J. Seekin and Company, Incorporated, an independent customs brokerage firm and bonded warehouse. Linda Barkley was living at the Westlake Terrace Apartments in North Dallas with 3-year-old Scotty and 7-year-old Elizabeth in 1979. On Tuesday, October 23rd of that year, at about 7 p.m., little Scotty begged his mother to let him, Elizabeth, and their 5-year-old neighbor and playmate, J.R. Potter, walk to a convenience store close by for some ice cream. Linda was planning on making crafts with the kids for an upcoming school Halloween carnival, so she told them to get to the store, buy their treats, and hurry back. Since she had a few calls she needed to make, Linda thought it would be a good time to do so while the children were away. The kids first stopped by JR's home, where his father George doled out some cash to his son for their ice cream run. He asked if Elizabeth and Scotty's mother was accompanying them, and JR told his dad no, but George figured no one was going to bother 3 kids on a short walk, and let his son leave. A few minutes later, at the Barkley apartment, Linda had just begun a call when she heard the sprinting feet of her son. Scotty was crying, Linda later said, in a strange way. The moment she heard this, Linda turned around and headed for the door. But before she could open it, the door swung open. It was Scotty, his face contorted in a way that suggested fear, despair, and confusion. "A man took my sister," the 3-year-old shouted. Linda ran outside with her boy, and the kid's neighbor's friend's father also came running out after having been alerted by 5-year-old JR. Together, George Potter, his son JR, Linda Barkley, and her son Scotty all ran to the path the kids had began taking as they headed to buy ice cream. After searching the convenience store and the apartment complex grounds, they found no sign of 7-year-old Elizabeth. Linda and George calmed the boys down from their frantic and panicked states and had them explain exactly what they saw. Scotty and JR's account was a nightmare. Linda Barkley ran back to her apartment and called the police. Within minutes, the Westlake Terrace apartment complex was swarmed by Dallas police cruisers. Immediately upon arrival, officers sat down 3-year-old Scotty and 5-year-old JR and listened to their story. They were walking down an alley that separated the apartment complex from a commercial business area, right along West-Northwest Highway, the 2900 block. As they made their way, a dark-colored car pulled into the complex's back parking lot, right next to the trio of children. The passenger side door swung open, and inside was a man exposing himself to Elizabeth, Scotty, and JR. Suddenly, the man bolted from the vehicle and began chasing 7-year-old Elizabeth, who he quickly caught. After he grabbed her, the strange man dragged her back to his car. Just before he sped away with the little girl, he told the boys he was going to, quote, take her and throw her in the water. There was no doubt in her mother's mind that Elizabeth wouldn't have gone easily. That was backed up by one witness statement. A resident at the complex happened to look through his window as the dark-colored car sped off and told police that the man driving was repeatedly hitting something in the back seat. He was striking Elizabeth, both Linda Barkley and Dallas Police Lieutenant B.G. Maroney said, most likely because she was attempting to escape. Immediately upon reporting the abduction, the cops blasted over the police band the descriptions of Elizabeth Barkley, the man who took her, and that man's car. Little Elizabeth weighed about 40 pounds and stood about 3 feet 6 inches tall. She was wearing white shorts and a halter top, colored red, white, and blue. The kidnapper's car was described as a 1974 black or dark gray two-door Buick. The trunk lid appeared to be damaged, rendering it unable to be completely closed. The driver was described as a husky black male, about 5 feet 10 inches tall with long sideburns. He was estimated to have been 30 to 35 years old. The All Points Bulletin, or APB, went out within minutes of the abduction, and a massive search, too, began. Because the Dallas police were going off the very general description given to them by 2 young children, and because the abduction of Elizabeth Barkley happened so quickly, investigators, according to Dallas Police Lieutenant Maroney, were left grasping at straws. Plenty of officers searched the immediate area near the Westlake Terrace apartments, places like parking lots, creek beds, and dumpsters. But since both 3-year-old Scotty and 5-year-old JR heard the kidnapper say he was going to throw Elizabeth in the water, the cops thought nearby Bachman Lake was a good place to concentrate the search efforts. Less than a mile away from the scene of the abduction, dozens of Dallas police officers searched the brushy fields and heavily wooded areas around the body of water. Lakefront neighborhoods were combed on foot and by police cruisers, as a helicopter covered ground quickly, though less thoroughly. Stranger abductions are incredibly rare, but the Dallas police theorized right away that considering the circumstances, it was highly doubtful Elizabeth knew the man who took her. Back at headquarters, officers with the Crimes Against Persons Unit began poring over the files of known sex offenders, but were unable to find an individual with a connection to the area that matched the description of their suspect. By computer, the Dallas police were able to compile a list of all similar crimes throughout the area. There's little doubt that the 1977 abductions and murders of 7-year-old Ladina McCoy and 12-year-old Susie Mages were among the cases on this printout. On this terrible October Tuesday night, virtually every Dallas police officer who was assigned to search for 7-year-old Elizabeth Barkley continued the efforts unpaid after their shifts had ended. On foot, horseback, and by helicopter, the searches of gravel pits, creek beds, lakes, rivers, ravines, brushy fields, dense thickets, dumpsters, and alleyways through the night ultimately proved fruitless. Little Elizabeth was nowhere to be found. Covering all their bases, and as an investigative formality, Dallas police detectives extensively interviewed Linda Barkley for signs that some sort of domestic issue led to the kidnapping of her daughter. But Linda had no enemies, And since Elizabeth's father, David, lived almost 1,800 miles away in San Francisco, California, a custody dispute theory was out. As David Barclay was making his way to Dallas by airplane, members of both his and Linda's families were racing to the city to aid in the searches and to help quell the mother's distress. At 5 a.m. on Wednesday, October 25th, 1979, David made it to town and began searching for his daughter. Also that day, tips began pouring in. Early on the second day of the searches, Dallas patrol officers clocking in for duty joined relatives, volunteers, and the officers who'd stayed searching throughout the night. Other volunteers hung posters featuring Elizabeth Barclay's photograph and description in restaurants, grocery stores, and other businesses across the city. Early that afternoon, an anonymous caller told the Dallas Morning News that a child's body could be found on the east side of Mountain Creek Lake in southwest Dallas near Grand Prairie, close to the old power plant. Remember this detail as we discuss the Ladina McCoy case later. A second call to the newspaper suggested searchers look in a ravine or dried-up creek bed there. A Dallas police chopper and ground searchers found nothing. Another tip called into police said Elizabeth's body would be found in a dumpster, but upon inspecting the specific location given, as well as other trash receptacles nearby, they discovered nothing. Local and out-of-town psychics called in like clockwork with their visions of Elizabeth's location, but not a single clue, of course, was gleaned by these parapsychological tips. David Barclay continued driving the streets of Dallas looking for his daughter after many of the searchers had called it quits. With little to nothing to go on, the panicked, gloom-laden father was after a dark-colored 1974 Buick, one with a damaged trunk lid. By the end of the second day of searches, not a trace of Elizabeth Barclay would be found, and the following day wasn't much different. On the afternoon of Thursday, October 26, 1979, a 20-year-old Dallas man called the police with an incredible story. A 6-foot-tall black man with a small, gray-colored mustache, who he'd never seen before, gave him a note to pass on to the cops. This note read that Elizabeth Barclay was unharmed, and if they'd deliver $10,000 to a house on the 1600 block of Pennsylvania Avenue, he'd let the little girl go. Police, of course, didn't buy this guy's story and arranged to meet him at a payphone near this residence. He was afraid to give the cops the note alone, so the unknown man agreed to wait with him for police to arrive, the caller told them. But when investigator C.W. Hudson showed up, it was only the 20-year-old there waiting. No one else was in sight. This caller was arrested on site and later charged with attempted extortion. The Dallas police were getting frustrated. They'd searched, they said, virtually everywhere a body could be found, and still nothing. The next day, the cruelty of claimed clairvoyance raised the hopes of Elizabeth Barclay's parents, and then dashed those hopes.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy is suspected of having killed as many as 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series that investigates the crimes that shocked the nation.
The thing everybody thought they knew wasn't the whole story.
John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now. Devil in Disguise. Only on Peacock.
Ay, qué hambre. ¿Pasamos por McDonald's?
Va, ¿qué ordenas normalmente?
Una quarter pounder.
Ah, eres una burger person.
Y unos McNuggets.
Ah, eres de las mías.
La mejor manera de conocer a alguien deal de McDonald's. Ordena por anticipado por el app de McDonald's y llévate 2 de tus favoritos, como un McNuggets de 10 piezas y una quarter pounder por solo $6. Precios y participación pueden variar. Producto individual a precio regular.
A psychic called Linda Barkley on Friday, October 27, 1979, and told her that her daughter Elizabeth had been released from captivity and was alive, wandering around either Louisville Lake in Denton County or White Rock Lake in Dallas. Linda and David quickly called for a press conference to announce the psychic's vision in hopes to gather a large number of searchers. The psychic told the Barkleys that Elizabeth had been molested but was still alive. The following day, Saturday the 28th, police and family of the missing girl mounted horses and searched both lakes extensively. Nothing was found, leading both police and David Barkley to theorize that the psychic caller was actually in on Elizabeth's kidnapping in some way. But all they knew was that the caller was a woman who sounded like she was in her 50s or 60s. The Dallas police welcomed and encouraged tips from any and every source when the efforts began. But on this fifth day of searches, they commented that the flood of calls from self-proclaimed soothsayers was hindering the investigation in a major way, wasting the department's time. Sergeant Harry Rice told reporters that these so-called psychics would have to go get a map and pick an area the department hasn't searched if they wanted to make any more claims. Holding on to whatever little hope remained, however, and desperate, Linda Barkley began speaking with any and every psychic that called. She traveled all over the Dallas area based on their visions. Linda gave the Dallas police a composite sketch drawn by a California police sketch artist, as described to them by a California psychic. She also had made her way through thick brush and tall, dense grass, and even walked through creeks in northwest Dallas, all on psychic tips that never panned out, even in any small way. "One of these times someone is going to give us something to go on, and we'll find her," Linda said. But it never happened that way. The searches for Elizabeth Barkley slowed, but continued. At one point, a local television station had to loan the Dallas police their helicopter as the police chopper broke down on one of the searches for the missing girl. They'd even scoured area dozens of miles away, like a large perimeter surrounding the Garza Little Elm Reservoir and Dam. Tips also slowed, but like the searches, continued. Elizabeth's parents, David and Linda, said their hopes soared with every tip they received. Sometimes they'd investigate the tips themselves, sometimes accompanying police. Many of the tips sounded so truthful and plausible, they'd bring along a change of clothing for Elizabeth. Sadly, she never returned home with them. For 7 weeks, the investigation into the abduction of Elizabeth Barkley dragged on at a snail's pace. The longer she was missing, the stronger the feeling got that the 7-year-old girl was no longer alive. In fact, the initial reward of $5,000 offered for Elizabeth's safe return immediately after her abduction was now a $10,000 reward offered for the arrest and conviction of her kidnapper. But on Saturday, December 15th, 1979, the Barkleys got a call that once again had them beaming with hope. "Hello?" Linda greeted the caller after picking up the receiver. A male caller spoke back. "Beth's all right," he said. "What?" Linda asked. "I just want you to know that Beth's all right." "Elizabeth?" Linda asked. "Elizabeth, yeah, we call her Beth," the unknown male clarified. "Are you sure?" But the caller hung up before answering that question. Linda believed that this unknown male caller was sincere, and she hoped that he would bring her daughter home. The following Monday, December 17th, the Barkley phone rang again. This caller's voice was different from the previous callers. "I have her. Where do I bring her to get the money?" And that was it. The caller hung up before Linda could even give him an address. All these calls were too short to be traced. And anyway, the Dallas police insisted that they were the work of a sick sense of humor, cruel prank calls at the expense of Linda and David Barkley's painful uncertainty. And the cops were right. Just outside Wills Point in rural western Van Zandt County, farmhands were setting out bales of hay for cattle on Thursday, December 20th, 1979. This area is about 60 miles east of where Elizabeth Barkley was abducted. As they made their way down a seldom-driven gravel path, generally traveled only by farm workers, about 3 miles north of Interstate 20 and 300 yards west of Farm to Market Road 2965, they came across bones in the road. The farmhands had been down the gravel drive the day before, so presumably animals had dragged the bones onto the road. Whatever the case, these farm workers knew right away that the bones were human and called the police. A Van Zandt County Justice of the Peace responded to the scene, along with officers who combed the area for more remains. Nearby, in a roadside ditch, hidden by tall grass, was a pile of more small bones and clothing. Beside the remains were 2 expended casings from a .45 caliber firearm. According to a source for the Dallas Morning News, bullet holes were discovered in the blouse found near the bones, and other pieces of clothing had knife cuts. The clothing was consistent with what 7-year-old Elizabeth Barkley was wearing when she was abducted. The next day, on what would have been her 8th birthday, the bones found in rural Van Zandt County were identified as Elizabeth Barkley's using dental records. The Dallas County Medical Examiner determined that Elizabeth had been shot in the chest with an unknown type and caliber of firearm. Disfiguration in her ribs showed telltale signs of having been shot, and of course there were also the bullet holes in her blouse. Though the cops had found 2 .45 caliber shell casings next to Elizabeth's body, they found many more of various caliber nearby using a metal detector. The desolate, rarely used gravel road was often used for target practice. The medical examiner also found a knife wound on Elizabeth's skull. She was estimated to have been killed on October 24th, 1979, the day following her abduction. Her death certificate reads, quote, "Found in decomposed condition after being kidnapped in Dallas. Death from undetermined, probably homicide." End quote. Probably, of course, is a gross under-exaggeration, and the Dallas cops knew that. On Saturday, December 22nd, 1979, Elizabeth's father, David Barkley, gave a statement to the press. "This is just not fair why such a beautiful, loving girl should have to end her life this way, scared and away from the family that loves her," he said. "It's also not fair since the man who did this is still out there. We have tried not to think bad of him, but now I have nothing but hate for him." Linda later said that whenever her anger about the loss of her daughter was getting to her, she'd hear Elizabeth's voice in her head. "She loved her family, she loved babies, her teachers, her friends," Linda said. "She could get angry, she would lose her temper just like the rest of us, but she always quickly found a reason to forgive, and the anger was gone. Anger saddened her, even anger in others." In the early morning hours of that same day, the Dallas police responded to an incident that they thought at first might be connected. In the parking lot of a grocery store in Dallas's Oaklawn neighborhood, 18-year-old Lisa and her 20-year-old friend Mark were standing talking beside her car. A male unknown to them approached and asked for a ride. He pulled a knife and held it to Lisa's throat, forcing her into her car. As they drove toward Marshall, where the assailant was attempting to go, a trucker behind them saw Lisa fighting with the man driving, and then watched her slip from his grasp and leap from the speeding vehicle onto the shoulder of Interstate 20. The truck driver stopped and helped Lisa into his semi and drove her to nearby Canton for medical treatment. After abandoning Lisa's car and forcing another person to drive him to Marshall, police got a description of the man, and he was arrested as he stepped out of a bus in Dallas, coming from Marshall, later that day. The man was 28-year-old Longview resident Robert Douglas Durkee, and detectives investigating Elizabeth Barkley's abduction and murder wasted no time interviewing the man. But the interview was fruitless. Dallas homicide investigator Gerald Robinson said that there were no links. A week later, on Saturday, December 29, 1979, a memorial service was held for Elizabeth at the Restland Funeral Home. Since Elizabeth didn't like sadness, her parents, Linda and David, said, they kept the service small and full of hope. Just a few close friends and family members attended at Linda and David's request, including Elizabeth's little brother Scotty, of course, who smiled as he gazed at the flower-framed photograph of his big sister. Elizabeth Barkley's remains were cremated on January 10, 1980. Though Dallas detectives received countless tips, performed some of the most extensive searches in the city's history, and painstakingly inspected the files of known sex offenders, they were unable to find any solid evidence linking anyone to Elizabeth Barkley's murder. Likely, a connection between Elizabeth's and two other cases from 1977 was heavily investigated as well. The cases of Ladina McCoy and Susie Mages.
Angie's List is now Angie, and caring for your home just got easier. Whether you need help with routine maintenance or a dream remodel, Angie makes it easy to see reviews, compare quotes, and connect with top local pros who can get the job done right. Plus, you can see upfront pricing and instantly book hundreds of projects. No phone tag, just the work you need done at a time that works for you. Angie's got your to-do list covered from start to finish. Book your next home project today at Angie.com. That's ANGI.com.
The Ford Mustang Mach-E, the F-150 Lightning, the E-Transit van, 3 of America's most iconic popular vehicles. They've been fully electrified, and they're making the revolutionary feel familiar. We've got a feeling they'll help make electric vehicles even more popular for all Americans. Call it a hunch. Ford electric vehicles, built for America, built Ford proud.
On Friday, February 11th, 1977, in Dallas, Texas, 7-year-old Ladina Ann McCoy kissed her mother on the cheek before heading out the door for school. She barely noticed the dreary, overcast morning and drizzling rain, since Ladina was excited to deliver to classmates the 26 hand-personalized Valentine's Day cards she had stuffed in her little brown purse. Shortly after she began walking, 2 other neighborhood girls accompanied her. Walking down the block and presumably giggling and carrying on about the upcoming day, Ladina dropped her purse, spilling the Valentine's cards. She bent down to pick it all up. As she did, the 2 other girls saw an opportunity to cross the street, and in the seconds it took them to get to the other side, they heard their friend Ladina scream. Startled, they turned to look. But as they did, tires screeched as a car sped from the scene. Ladina was gone. Her parents wouldn't know for hours, until they got home at about 4:30 p.m., and Ladina wasn't there. They panicked as they found out she hadn't been at school. Ladina's mother, Darlene, talked to reporters about discovering her daughter's disappearance at a press conference.
We went directly over to a little friend's house that she walks home with, and she said that she hadn't seen her at school that day. So the next thought that entered our mind was to check with the principal, and he checked the absentee list and said that she had been absent in school that day, that she hadn't been there. So then we cruised around a little bit and seen a policeman and stopped him and turned it in. And that was about all.
After reporting her missing daughter to police, Ladina's parents eventually discovered what the 2 little girls walking to school with her saw. The girls described the car to police. It was an older model, mid-sized, and light in color. The children thought they saw 2 men in the vehicle, though they couldn't give descriptions, And anyway, they weren't totally sure it was 2. It happened so fast. An extensive search for Ladina McCoy was conducted, from vacant buildings and alleyways to wooded areas and creek beds. But police had absolutely no leads, and the missing child case file was quickly buried beneath other cases.
No matter who it is, she knows not to get in the car with them. Or, if they asked her to just run, then come home.
Did she ever run away from home?
No.
This is being treated as an abduction. Do you have any idea of anybody who might want to take your daughter from you, a relative or any friend or anybody?
No one that hasn't been completely and thoroughly investigated.
A reward fund grew to $8,000 and posters featuring Ladina McCoy's photograph and description were hung in businesses throughout the area. She's 4 feet tall with blonde hair and blue eyes, the description read. Ladina was in the 1st grade. Some friends and family called her Dina, some called her Dino. Her mother Darlene never gave up and continuously searched for Ladina, hanging posters, passing out pamphlets, and talking to anyone who might know something, anything. At about 4:30 p.m. on June 11th, 1977, 4 months to the day after Ladina Ann McCoy disappeared, 2 fishermen found her remains in a Mountain Creek Lake runoff creek in southwest Dallas. A fact that is probably the origin of a fake tip called into the Dallas Morning News 2 years later when the entire city was searching for Elizabeth Barkley. That caller also made a second call, if you'll remember, suggesting that searchers look in a dried-up creek bed for Elizabeth. A dried-up creek bed was where Ladina was found. The call could have been a prank for sure, but it is suspicious. Since Ladina's remains were completely skeletonized, the Dallas County Medical Examiner was unable to estimate a time of death, but the cause was obvious. Ladina, like Elizabeth Barkley would 2 years later, sustained a gunshot wound to the chest. Where she was found was dry, but all evidence led the police and the medical examiner to conclude that Ladina was dumped in the water either after death or near death, and that the water had long dried up in that particular area. Since the young girl had no dental records and had never broken any bones, she could only be identified by what remained of the distinct red knit pants and multicolored sweater that were found on her, pieces of which were strewn on and around the creek bed near her remains. On July 19th, 8 days after Ladina's remains were discovered, a man walked into the Dallas Police Department with an incredibly interesting discovery. This man had found a pistol in an unmistakably unique holster in the woods on Mountain Creek Lake, near where the body of Ladina McCoy was discovered. The leather holster was stamped O. Ball, the signature that Fort Worth homicide detective Oliver Ball put on the holsters he handcrafted, usually to give to Fort Worth Police Academy graduates. Ball was retired at the time of this discovery, but worked with police to try to identify who the holster was made for. But the ex-head of homicide detective had made hundreds at this point. It's unknown if the one-of-a-kind holster or the pistol found within is in any way connected to Ladina McCoy's slaying. Darlene, Ladina's mother, hounded the police to find her daughter's killer, telling the Dallas Morning News, quote, "I want this person, the killer, found, not so much because of what has happened to Ladina, but to keep it from happening to some other child. I am bitter and I want this person stopped. I don't want anyone else to go through this." No one has ever been charged with the murder of Ladina McCoy. If the cops and the medical examiner were right, and Ladina was dumped in a body of water that had dried up by the time her bones were found, her case shares a similarity to another case. Since the washing machine wasn't working at the Mages home in the Shady Shores neighborhood of Denton, Texas, Mary Mages and her daughter, 12-year-old Suzanne Marie Mages, or Susie as she was known, took the family laundry to the Quick Clean Laundromat in the Carriage Square shopping center. Mary left Susie at the laundromat to tend to the clothes so she could interview someone for the cook position at the restaurant she and her husband Dell owned, something the responsible 12-year-old girl was well capable of. As she was driving away, Mary saw Susie walking to the Burger King directly next door to the shopping center. She'd given Susie a little cash to buy a treat. It was later reported by employees of that Burger King that Susie ordered a strawberry milkshake, and although she was a shy girl, one employee remembered her talking to a white male in his mid-20s while standing in line. This suggested that the man was an acquaintance of Susie's. When Mary returned about 30 minutes after she left, at about 2:45 p.m., Susie was gone. For the next several days, Dell and Mary Mages searched everywhere for their missing daughter, as did tons of volunteers and the Denton police, of course. Posters featuring Susie's photo and description were hung in the windows of businesses and telephone poles within a 60-mile radius by family and volunteers, including in Dallas. A $5,000 reward was all but immediately offered for information leading to the 12-year-old's whereabouts. The investigation by detectives concentrated on Denton, since that's where Susie went missing, and for 9 days the search stayed intense but fruitless. On Tuesday, October 4th, 1977, a female caller who wished to remain anonymous phoned the Dallas Police Department to report a shocking discovery. She'd found a small body floating in a muddy gravel pit in South Oak Cliff, a Dallas suburb about 40 miles from where Susie was last seen. The spot was about 50 feet from the well-traveled Sutherland Avenue, just across the street from the Keast Drive-In Theater, and down a dirt road often used by fishermen. The area wasn't as secluded as you'd expect someone to pick who was dumping a body. The body found there was later identified as Susie Marie Mages. Her death ruled a homicide by drowning. Many other facts of her autopsy report have been kept close to the chest by police. But you can find many more details and hear from her family and friends on our 5-part series on Susie Mages' case. Though the investigation into the 12-year-old's homicide produced plenty of suspects, as the result of police efforts, a private investigator the family hired, and the work of Susie's parents, Dell and Mary Mages, no one has been brought to justice. Though there are similarities and much speculation can be made due to just the circumstantial facts and evidence alone, it's unknown if these Dallas child murders are connected in any way. If you have any information about the 1975 murder of Elizabeth Barkley, please contact the Texas Rangers at their cold case website or by phone at 800-346-3242. If you have any information about the 1977 murder of Ladina McCoy or the 1977 murder of Susie Mages, please contact North Texas Crime Stoppers at 817-373-8477. If you'd like to help find answers for the families of unsolved crime victims from all over, or perhaps help identify a Jane or John Doe, you can at DNAsolves.com by submitting your DNA data from a consumer testing company like Ancestry or 23andMe to their database. If you haven't tested with one such company, you can get a kit directly from them by going to connect.dnasolves.com. Your DNA data there is used only for law enforcement investigations, nothing else. At DNAsolves.com, too, you can donate to one of the crowdfunding cases to help identify an unknown decedent or solve a cold case. We'll provide links in the show notes. You can find Gone Cold Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by using @GoneColdPodcast. We're also now on YouTube, where you can find us searching our name. We'll have a better URL soon, so hold tight. We'd appreciate your subscription there. you can support Gone Cold at patreon.com/Gone Cold Podcast. Donors at all levels there get the show ad-free, and for just $2.50, you'll have access to episodes featuring stories of mostly solved Texas crimes and the bad actors who perpetrated them, such as the Devil of West Texas and the Desert Killer, among others. Thanks so much to everyone who supports us there. We could not do this without you, and we appreciate your support beyond words. If you like what we're doing with Gone Cold, you can also help support the show in a major way by leaving a 5-star rating and short review on iTunes. Reviews there help make Gone Cold visible to more people, and the more folks who listen to these stories, the greater the likelihood someone will come forward with information on a case. If you haven't already, we would immensely appreciate your 5-star rating and review at iTunes. You can also leave us a review on audible.com, and that would be kind of a big deal too. Thanks. The Dallas Morning News, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the Wills Point Chronicle, and the Denton Record Chronicle were used as sources for this episode. Thanks for listening, y'all.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.